It is super cool to heal, specifically from childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is just wild. It's kind of like, consider it this way. Imagine you've got a hose, right? And you could look at it either as an internal or external thing. Like you can actually create a kink on the hose, or you could put something inside the hose that obstructs the flow and creates a blockage. Childhood trauma is very similar because the trauma is happening at a point in time when you can't tell the difference between your shit and somebody else's shit. So therefore, it's actually really challenging to, because you haven't done it yet, but to differentiate, right? Which is ironic as well because differentiation is a very crucial part of the development for an individual, right? And differentiation really being self and other space in between, noticing the difference between what's your shit, what's not your shit, what's and what's somebody else's shit. But here's the really fascinating thing that I actually I arrived at this idea or insight somewhere between a few days ago and a week ago. Of course, depending on how aware of the self a person is, they're going to be more or less likely to take other people's shit. And when I say that, I mean specifically projections and displacements as defense mechanisms, right? But I was looking at it and I was like, the reason why we get traumatized is because we don't know anything when we're younger. Boundaries are very natural for children. Like when we're in infancy, when we do the whole like no, right? That's setting a boundary. It doesn't matter whether it makes sense or not. What matters is that we're setting a fucking boundary. However, you can, of course, adults can get traumatized, but depending on how aware of the self a person is, depending on how aware of him or herself a person is, right? They're going to be able to they've already, if they're as aware as they possibly can be because they've done the work of individuating, differentiating, all of that stuff, they then can differentiate between self and other, and then therefore, not take on somebody else's shit. Children, and this is the very interesting thing about this too. Children are like sponges. They can learn a language like that. They can also learn with a lack of self-awareness that somebody else's shit, usually being a parent figure that's projected onto them, then becomes their shit. Which is why you see grown adults who are just not aware of themselves, and they think that whatever shit they were given from their parents when they were younger had anything to do with them ever, and it didn't ever. And this is why it's wild. This is why childhood trauma is wild, because many people, they get traumatized by their parents' shit, usually stuff like projections and displacement, and they blame themselves, right? They see themselves as defective, right? But a person, an adult human that is self-aware, can't be traumatized by projections. I don't think they can, at least. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. If you know yourself and a projection is really that of somebody else's shit onto you, right? And you can actually differentiate and be like, oh, well, wait a second. No, that's their shit, not mine. Like, that's the entire thing that separates a person from another person. Like, that's it. And childhood has to be so challenging, especially when it comes to trauma. I mean, in my own experiences, yeah, you know, like, it's like codependency, learning that really sucked. It sucked the life out of me because there was a life that I could have given myself. There's regret here, by the way, and I'm 100% okay with it. Regret is healthy. When I look at codependency and the effects that it has had on me and everything, I look at how I could have approached things. It's challenging because it's like it requires more self-awareness. To be able to get out of something like codependency requires self-awareness, right? Codependency is how you see me is how I see me. How you feel about me is how I feel about me, right? When you can become aware of that, right? That's one thing. When you can also become aware of, through necessary and healthy ego development, individuation, and differentiation, codependency dies. It falls. It's gone. Like, individuation and differentiation are the fucking key, or keys, to the dissipating of these unhealthy and dysfunctional ways of living, right? When you actually individuate and differentiate, when you can tell the difference between yourself and the other person, right? And actually be like, what are they saying? They're saying something. It sounds like they're saying something about me. Do I know myself? Yeah, I do know myself. Hey, that's your shit, not mine. Like, yeah, it's like, it's wild. It really is. It's absolutely wild. More recently, I've been having deep conversations with my sweetheart about all this stuff, and it's been wild. You know, like, codependency essentially is narcissistic in an unhealthy way. You see somebody else as an extension of yourself because, in one way or another, whether big or small, you gain self from them. How you see me is how I see me. How you feel about me is how I feel about me. It's wild. It's totally wild. It really is super cool to heal from childhood trauma, because if you don't, there's a really good chance that you're going to continue to have blockages up and down your body throughout your life, right? You're going to continue repeating the same patterns compulsively over and over again, because childhood is fucking hardwired, and it's familiar, and it's comfortable, and disliking yourself is very fucking easy, but looking at yourself to realize that the only reason you dislike yourself is because mommy and daddy taught you how to, it's fucking easy. It's easy to live in a fucking lie. It's hard to look at yourself, see a bunch of really complicated and confusing shit, untangle everything, do the best you can to make sense of everything, and then be like, oh, I'm like a blank fucking slate. I can create whatever I want to. All of these things that people have told me about themselves have had nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. They're just telling me how they feel about themselves because they're insecure and they were traumatized, just like I was. Wow. Right? Childhood trauma is also very interesting because in some ways it can actually be a gift. If I wasn't traumatized by the things that I was traumatized by, I wouldn't, at least I don't think I would, be taking the time to learn about all these different things, which, by the way, is awesome. Learning about codependency, learning about narcissism, narcissistic extensions, individuation, differentiation, the separation between the self and other, boundaries. Now, let me just make this very clear, because either it happens for a person earlier on in life because they come from a healthier system, not a perfect system, but a healthier system, a functional system, family system, by the way. Or it just fucking doesn't, because they come from an unhealthy family system that has to do with, and oh, by the way, enmeshment is also one of the other things that I was going to talk about. Enmeshment is so fascinating. It's the opposite of individuality. It's everyone's boundaries are just tangled together and just like a fucking shit show. It's crazy. So yeah, you know, it's wild. It's been a wild experience healing from childhood trauma, and I'm just I'm grateful to be here. Used to have a fuck ton of anxiety and depression, like through the fucking roof. So much so that I just couldn't fucking be me. I couldn't operate. I couldn't be, you know, just a human dude being. A human dude being. Wow, that's interesting. That's really what it's all about. I can tell you right now, the path that is introspecting and looking at the self is just absurdly rewarding. There's nothing but potential and growth there. I recommend it.